we're ready to start. Welcome to this first round of the Italian English Championship. Today we are debating the following motion. Developed countries have more obligation to accept more climate refugees to be... climate refugees, sorry, it's the first step for everyone. So welcome to the proposition team, to the opposition team, to the panelists, and if everyone is ready, we can start by giving the floor to the first proposition team speaker. Francesca, you may start when you're ready.
I will start my speech in 3, 2, 1. Good morning, everybody. To understand the context, we should first analyze some definitions. Here we are. First of all, we have developed countries. By that, we mean those nations characterized by 3 main factors: high standard of living, strong and diversified economy, and also access to healthcare and education for everybody. Then we have the concept of moral beauty. By that, we mean not an abstract condition, but instead those principles based on current bioethical currents. In fact, we have also some exponents, some philosophers that will help us to understand better this concept. For example, we have Amartya Sen, an Indian philosopher, and also Martha Newman. By that, moral duty, we mean that every country should provide to their citizens a better condition of life. Then, last thing we want to analyze is the concept of we accept more. By that, we mean that developed countries should accept more climate refugees than developing ones, because otherwise the imbalance would be both unjust and unsustainable for everybody. So now I will analyze better the context of our motion. In fact, the climate change refugees are also called the forgotten victims of climate change, according to the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees. This organization has also released data showing that the number of people displaced by climate change-related disasters since 2010 has risen to 21.5 million. So, I will also ask you, judges, to judge our debate according to these criteria. We have, of course, made a research of a world in which fairness and human rights are guaranteed for everybody. So, I will now explain better my team line. First of all, I will introduce you our first argumentation that is entitled Historical Responsibility. Then we have our second argumentation, the so-called better opportunities implied a position of power to resonate the imbalance. Then my second speaker will explain better our third argumentation, the so-called developed nation should welcome climate refugees as an act of prevention for the future. So, I will now start to explain better our first argumentation, the so-called historical responsibility. Let's go back in time, since the first and the second industrial revolution set up, and then the colonization era. That's the problem. We have, as developed nation, as European or Western countries, an historical responsibility toward the underdeveloped nation or the developing ones. In fact, we need to analyze better these concepts. The adverse impacts of climate change and environmental degradation, which are some of the factors causing large-scale movements of people, are actually the result of many years of gas emissions, since of course, the Industrial Revolution, and then the colonization era.
Behind. So you think that countries should still pay consequences of something wrong they did 100 years ago, 200 years ago?
Of course, because that's a moral responsibility. We have explained that, and we also will explain that better in our second and third argumentations. That's our point. This is the focus of our first argumentation. It's called historical responsibility. Is a condition that every nation should face with courage. Because I was saying, nowadays, underdeveloped countries are called climate hotspots. These, for example, are Haiti, Zimbabwe, and Afghanistan. We have a moral responsibility due to also an historical factor to help them. People who are forced to live in countries where they have to fight with natural disasters, like, for example, desertification, drought, or rising sea levels, need to face reality. They have no other option. They have to emigrate. Thus, governments from all around the world should work to protect climate refugees. I explained already. Every single nation is responsible for addressing environmental degradation. Anyway, developed countries have a much more big responsibility towards them, due to, of course, their historical emissions. Accepting more climate refugees is a tangible way for developed nations to fulfill their moral responsibility. Addressing the imbalance between those who have contributed most to the climate change and those who suffer its most severe consequences. No, thank you. Even if we are debating about such an important theme nowadays in 2025, we have seen that it has already been discussed many times, also from many years. Since from the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change in Rio in 1992. It recognized that developed countries, in order to protect human rights, as we also have explained in our definitions, should lead in combating climate change due to their greater historical responsibility to greenhouse gas emissions, without also forgetting to underline that the scope and nature of this effort should reflect their different national circumstances. Now I will introduce you my second argumentation. Historical responsibility is not, of course, the only reason to do so. Developed countries should help as many climate refugees as they can, not just because they are able to, but also because they are in a unique position to do so. So, in this way, the imbalance in resources translates directly into greater moral responsibility. But let me just show you why they have the capability to do so. For instance, they have a robust infrastructure and services. Then, of course, they have economic capacity, economic stability. And then, of course, also, they are characterized by institutional stability and, last but not least, lower vulnerability to climate impacts. Now, I will end my speech. Thank you for listening.
Thank you. Okay, now we are ready to listen to the first opposition team speaker. Clarissa, you may start.
Okay, my speech will start in 3, 2, 1. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, esteemed judges and fellow debaters. My name is Clarissa and I am the first speaker of the opposition team. It's a pleasure to meet you. The topic that we are debating today is developed countries have a moral obligation to accept more climate refugees, and we like to accept the definition given by the opposition team. However, I would like to highlight one thing they said about moral obligation. They said that it's towards their citizens. so towards the citizen of their own country, every country's own citizens. So I would just like to clarify that, and the fact that developed countries have a more obligation to accept more climate refugees than developing countries does not mean that developed countries do not face the same consequence given by climate change. Going on, I would like to first confirm what the other team has stated so far, and then we'll move on to our points. Now, regarding their overall view on the topic, she said a number that is incredibly enormous about the number of displacement, around 20 million, if I'm correct. And 20 million people displacement is a number that is incredible. It's more than a lot of nations. And we know for a fact that climate change is not going back, it's going forward, and there are going to be more and more climate change refugees. So if your concept is to just emigrate, to throw out all those refugees to developed nations, how will you sustain this in the future? Because the number is going to increase and increase and increase, and developed nations will not have the possibility to sustain this burden. Then moving on to their point, the first point is about historical responsibility. However, as my first speaker asked in the API, we don't think that it is correct to just state that they have a more responsibility based on something that the nation did 100 years ago, 200 years ago. And another thing that they have highlighted is about colonization, and I don't think that is purely correct, because a country that was colonized is, example, USA, and USA is one of the developed countries, most developed countries right now. So colonization does not mean that they are necessarily undeveloped right now. And the last thing I would like to confirm about is the last argumentation you gave us, which is that developed nations are in a unique position to offer support and to accept more climate refugees. We think that this is not entirely true. In fact, yes, of course they are more developed, as the term says itself, so they have a stronger economy and a stronger infrastructure, but that does not mean that they are a perfect country and that they can take in as more climate refugees as they like. This is not what is going on in our world, and I think we all need to acknowledge that. Now, moving on, I would like to share with you our overall view on this topic. While climate change is undoubtedly causing enormous trouble to everyone and every nation on Earth, stating that developed nations have a moral obligation to accept more climate refugees is simply unfair. By acknowledging the existence of a moral obligation, we are just damaging both developed nations who cannot sustain this and climate refugees, who should not be just thrown out and abandoned by their own government, by their own nations. By convincing yourself that developed countries must act out of morality instead of collectively establishing a tailored solution that could benefit developing countries and their citizens, you are just doing something that will not benefit any of us, not even developing countries, not even their citizens. And while the proposition team is trying to justify this behavior, we are now going to explain to you why it is impossible to sustain this. Moving on from a general perspective, I would like now to share with you our timeline to be more clear. As the first speaker, I will show you why this moral obligation would encourage more immigration than an effective solution. And my second point will be regarding that it is not a moral duty for developed nations to accept more climate refugees, so to take in more climate refugees into their country. And our second speaker, Matilde, will elaborate on the further social disruption possible situation. Our third speaker, Jacopo, will then sum up all our arguments and provide you with data and examples. To begin with my first point, I would like to ask you all a question. Why should developed countries invest in long-term solutions if they are sure that developed countries will always take care of their people? Obviously, relying on the moral obligation will necessarily shift responsibility away from developing nations. In fact, stating that there is a moral obligation suggests that displacement during climate crisis is normalized, is expected. And normalizing this can be really dangerous because it can reduce the urgency to build rugged climate resilience. And as a result, governments may feel less pressure to find a solution, to find a long-term recovery for these people. And they will not further protect vulnerable communities. They might also choose to redirect the only resources that they have because they are developing.
Don't you think that climate refugees in these moments are only thinking about their self, their lives, instead of thinking something to a long-term solution that would imply what we are seeing?
Thank you for your question. The first thing is that we are debating about what developed nations should or shouldn't do. Of course, climate refugees are only thinking about their survival. But thinking about their survival is only in that moment, only when the climate disaster hit. Then, what are they going to do? Once they come to another nation, it's not easy to going back, and if their own nation didn't do anything to further substitute their previous systems, they will not have a life that they have desired for their own life. So thank you anyway for your question. And so another that I would like to show you is an analysis conducted by the Guardian newspaper regarding Bangladesh. And this analysis shows that some nations like Bangladesh that have decided to actually imply some prevention measures like prevention towards drought or towards flood have in fact led to a 30% reduction in displacement during extreme weather events compared to nearby regions who did not decide to imply this. And this shows that putting effort in finding a local solution that can benefit all is the key solution and not immigration. Then moving on to our second point, thank you.
Don't you think that by doing all these reforms on the territory to make it more sustainable will take time, and this time is not affordable because simply they are in a very dangerous position, so they have to emigrate? Thank you.
Thank you. No, actually, I do not think that because we need to start it now. If we're not starting now, when we are starting about that. And so the last point I would like to share with you is the fact that developed countries do not have a moral obligation to take in more refugees. The moral obligation of developed countries is first regarding their own citizens. So if we have countries who can ensure that all their citizens are housed, well-fed, and a fair opportunity to succeed and all this, yes, we could say that they should have the moral obligation to accept more refugees. But right now, not even the most highly developed nation has reached this point, and probably they will never do this in future because it is almost impossible. And a lot of data, like the one reported by the King's Fund, for example, demonstrate that even in England, which is a highly developed country, we have problems regarding sanitation, which is one of the primary essential for the life of everyone. So for this point, we showed why developed countries should not have the moral obligation to accept more climate refugees. Thank you for reading my speech.
Okay, I'll now give floor to the second proposition team speaker. Please.
Hi everybody, I'm the second speaker of the proposition team, and I'll start my speech in 3, 2, 1. I'd first like to start my speech by rebutting some of the things that were said by the opposition team. The first thing I wanted to address is when they suggested that they shouldn't still pay for responsibilities that they had hundreds and hundreds of years ago. I want to underline here that the responsibility of those developed countries is not just about the damage that they made to those people, and the damage that they made is still present, and so they still have to face those responsibilities because it's them who made that action. But also, it's not just about that damage, it's also about the wealth that they took from that damage. So it's not just about those other populations that are underdeveloped that have to face the consequences of their enrichment, it's the enrichment itself that they made out of suffering of others that they have to spend for helping those people. So that is why they still have this responsibility, because this reality still exists, they still have to be addressed. The second thing I wanted to say is, they said, and I quote, that they face the same consequences as underdeveloped countries. This is simply not true because, well, they accepted our definitions of developed countries being more structured and more just infrastructurally talking, economically talking, socially talking, it's better than an underdeveloped country. So when there's more structure, the thing is harder to crumble. So if there's somebody that has to make the effort to let more people in, it's going to be those exact populations, developed countries that have the possibility to do so, because of course they're going to have some consequences, and I get the concept that the first speaker was trying to go by, that was like, they have to think of their own citizens as well, but since they have a structure that is more stable, it's way harder to put a structured foundation down, rather than some other, for example, underdeveloped countries that instead have to face a complete disorganization in their own territories. Yeah, go ahead.
So every developed country's infrastructure can take these huge immigratory flux?
Well,
sorry.
Yeah, no, sorry.
No, go on.
Okay. When you say huge, I wouldn't really put it that way. The motion doesn't say that it has to be huge, it just says more, you know? So it basically says that there's some countries that have to take a more responsibility and more effort than others. And what we're trying to prove here is that if there's somebody that has to do it, it's of course going to be those that have more infrastructure. Now, I'm not saying that all developed countries have the perfect infrastructure, but of course they do have a better infrastructure than underdeveloped countries. Also, another thing that I wanted to tackle is when they talked about having tailored solutions. We, as a proposition team, agree with that. But I also think that having tailored solutions does not imply that you don't have to accept more climate refugees in your territory. What I'm saying by this is, of course, developed countries could still put funds and put effort in the territories that are going through these crises, but that does not imply that they don't still have to accept more climate refugees in their territories. The two things can coexist, you know? And also, the two things can coexist, but of course, accepting more climate refugees into the territory is the more urgent and impactful situation that we could go through. I'm going to try to tell you why now. When the motion says accept, it means that climate refugees are already at the borders, because I don't know if you're comfortable with the Geneva Convention that was made in 1951. It's about international law, and it has not been changed from that. Climate refugees are not considered to be refugees that have urgency to be let in. So the migration process is not underscored, it's not under the international law. So basically, it's very, very difficult for a climate refugee to make the request to be let in a territory from their own country. So they can't just wait in their own country in order to be accepted and then go. So basically, when they go to these countries, they have very impactful and dangerous travels that they have to go through to reach those situations. And once they are there at the borders, you have to be let them in, because otherwise they're going to stay there at the borders and they're going to have to go somewhere else that is unsafe and unpractical for them. So yeah, that's basically what I want to say. Accepting is the only way that they can help and they can prove that historical responsibility is being forsaken, it's being followed. Because I want to make that equation to make that clear. Historical responsibility means that they have to help more, and the most urgent and impactful way that they can help is by accepting. So historical responsibility equals help more equals accept more. This is, I hope I've proven to you how this is important. Also, I'm now moved to my third and last argumentation of our team line, that is, developed countries should welcome more refugees as an act of prevention. It's kind of linked to what I was just saying about them having to be accepted in order for them not to go through very harder and more impactful and dangerous situations for the climate refugee themselves. I hope we've tried to prove to you, and I hope it's past clear that up to this point, the reason why developed countries have to let those people in is because they have an historical responsibility, they have capacity, and they also have, that's one thing that I want to add, legislation that will protect the climate refugee, because of course developed countries are more developed, even socially and humanitarianly, than underdeveloped countries. So if they, who have both the power and the privilege to accept those people, won't let them into their territories, once they have already arrived to that border, where are they going to go? If developed countries don't let them in and they can't go back to their territory, because of course, if they migrate, that means that their territory is not affordable to be lived in anymore, they have to go into underdeveloped countries. Now, what's the problem with this? What happens when they have no other choice but to go into an underdeveloped country? Underdeveloped country that has those two characteristics, in our opinion. First of all, they don't have a stronger or any legislation at all that protects refugees' human rights. And that's extremely dangerous. And also, they already face way more poverty, political instability, and weak infrastructure than developed countries. No, thank you. So what happens at this point when they arrive to those countries that have these two very big difficulties In the first scenario, where there's no big legislation that protects them, they could end up being enslaved, persecuted, tortured, and that's obviously not the main goal of global relationships and global solidarity. And also, history has proven to us that when there's the equation of sudden population pressure because of mass migration that is not accepted by developed countries, limited resources, that ends up in violence and wars. And there are two examples that I want to quote. The first one was Bangladesh, that I think was already brought up by the opposition team. Bangladesh has rising sea levels, and 10,000 people each year are displaced into big cities that are confinement. Those big cities cannot handle as much population, and so there's a high risk of crimes. Not risk of crimes, there are high crimes and violence, and many, many people die for those interpopulation conflicts. And also the Syrian civil war, an example. Not a lot of people know that the Syrian civil war was actually started because there was 10 years of incredibly big drought. And so those people had to move into big cities. But those big cities didn't have the infrastructure, again, because they're underdeveloped. And so that's why more conflict and more violence was spread out. What I try to prove to you is that when developed countries don't accept more climate refugees because they don't follow that moral obligation that they have, we end up fueling conflicts that will inevitably then cross borders, because of course, the Syrian war example that I brought, goes from Lebanon to Europe, so it's incredibly big. It has brought it up in time. And it's also dehumanizing to the refugee. And the point here is that none of this is inevitable, because when developed countries let those people, more climate refugees in, they are actually acting out of an act of prevention. Prevention that will then lead to contribute to future international stability and also human dignity of every refugee. Since they are in a unique position to do so, they have to act on this moral obligation. Thank you very much. I concluded my speech.
Thank you. I now give floor to the second opposition team speaker, Matilde.
So I'm going to start in 3, 2, 1. Good morning, Madam Chairman, ladies and gentlemen, fellow debaters, and esteemed judges. I am Matilde, second speaker of the opposition team. We as the opposition team believe that developed countries should not accept any more climate refugees. My first speaker, Ms. Amigo, has already introduced two of the key points of our argument, which we're going to remind you all, state why this accepting more refugees encourages immigration instead of solutions, and why it is not a moral duty regarding developed nations. Today I'm going to present you our third and last point, but first I would love to confute what the proposition team has said so far. So, I'm going to start by how they have acknowledged that climate refugees are not internationally acknowledged. And I would say that given that we have so many institutions, so many corporations whose main goal is humanitarian goals, is protection, is cooperation, that allows us to ask the question, why is that? It's because there are much more pressing matters going on internationally. It's because climate disasters happen all the time, and our main goal is to prevent and not help in the sudden. Yes.
So, if a person is dying in their own territory, are you going to let them die because there are a more urgent situation that you have to take care of?
Of course, I don't think like that is correct. But of course, we live in a world where criminality, where disasters of all kinds happen all the time. We live in a world that is a disaster completely. So we need to make a list, make a ranking of what's more pressing and what's not. And we know that we live in a historical context that is peculiar to say the least. We have a pandemic not too long ago. We have 2 active wars going on, not to mention all the minor wars that are happening right now. So our main goal is to, let's say, legislate the situations first, and then let's say have the prevention of climate change, and then we can occupy themselves of the climate refugees. Then they stated that, as we all know, developed countries are more economically and on a humanitarian level developed in spite of the developing countries. And while that is correct, we don't still think that that could encourage accepting more climate refugees, because no country is ultimately perfect, no nation is perfect. Let's take a look at all the developed countries we know of. The United States, they're a powerhouse economic-wise, but are they really perfect as a country with their legislation? China, as well, is an economic powerhouse, but on a humanitarian level, is that considered to be developed, to say the least? At least not developed that well to be able to accept even more climate refugees and more people? We don't think so, as its data states. Then they have mentioned Bangladesh. We have talked about how there's a high level of criminality and all pressing issues. And the proposition team states that it's because of all the people that are gathered there, because apparently there's more than enough, more than is supposed to. But is there really a matter of the people, or is it a matter of resources? Is it a matter of the government? Is it a matter of the legislation that allows criminality to roam free? Is it really just a mass of people? China, for instance, has the highest populations known worldwide, not worldwide, but in a single nation. And we still don't have that much levels of criminality, for instance, because it's about the government, it's about the legislation, it's not about having a whole lot of people gathered today in the same place. So now I'm going to present you the last point that further validates our line of reasoning that revolves around one broad topic, that is social disruption. In fact, accepting more climate refugees will lead to said disruption that articulates in adverse effects on existing social institutions and social problems, and then the deterioration of the salary structures in the rural, urban, and informal economy. But now let's assess the various situations gradually. So immigration can adversely impact social institutions by straining resources and by altering social norms more rapidly than the institution can adapt. But how? Because social institutions are designed around the needs, the values, and behaviors of existing population. And so when there is a large influx of immigrants coming, especially those from backgrounds that differ a lot culturally or economically from the one of the host country, these institutions may struggle to adapt. Immigration can strain public services by increasing demand for healthcare, education, housing, welfare systems, often outpacing available resources and infrastructure that are offered to them. Furthermore, another problem arises, the one of cultural identity. In fact, while optimists insist that assimilation is proceeding at pace, we know that immigration always causes cultural changes. And of course, although not changes are inherently negative, most cause social disruption and can become fundamentally negative and can harm the democracy of a country. Every society, in fact, functions on a shared set of norms, of values, of social practices that underpin institutions like civic life, like law. Yes.
So do you think that finding a compromise in this situation would be impossible? Thank you.
Thank you, Rita. Well, as things are now, I don't think a compromising is possible. Let's say we focus on prevention. Our main goal is to focus on prevention and then eventually lead to a compromise if the situation allows. But how things there are now is not an option. So, when large numbers of immigrants arrive from whole different backgrounds, this shared understanding can begin to fragment, thus harming the institutions that are foundational properties to the one of the host countries. And why is that? It's because of difference in language, different in religion, different in customs. A study conducted by Robert Boyd in the Journal of International Migration and Integration showed that despite the decline in ethnic neighborhoods following the 1924 Act, they did not disappear. In fact, Americans of Polish, Greek, Russian, Jewish ancestry still live in a residential pattern that has nothing to do with their socioeconomic status. And why is that? It's because they retain cultural affinity from their ancestors, and thus describing and showing how Migration does not lead inexorably to assimilation, rather generates cultural differences that persist within time. Turning attention onto the second matter, as anticipated, an increase of immigration can lead to a deterioration in salary structure across former rural and the urban sector of the economy. And why is that? Because when large numbers of immigrants enter a workforce, a labor market, there's a higher demand, there's a higher supply of workers that increases faster than the demand for work, thus leading to competition between low-skill and mid-skill workers, and leading to tension and misunderstanding altogether, especially in areas with limited regulatory oversight, leading to informal contracts and the lowering of wages. With that, I would like to end my speech. Thank you for your attention.
So now I'll give floor to the third proposition team speaker, Chiara. When we're ready, I'll start.
Okay, I will start my speech in 3, 2, 1. Good morning everyone, I'm the speaker as you can see, and I will be starting my speech by rebutting what the opposition team said. First of all, I'll go by underlining the fact that the thing that they're saying is essentially against the motion. I mean, our main goal right now is to guarantee human rights. We don't think that having a better way, a better quality of life for those living in already developed nations have the right to don't accept these refugees and basically letting them die in wherever they're living just because they want to keep their better quality of life. We believe that even if there may be some social disruption, there may be some lowering wages, which is already happening by the way, so it's not something that the refugees would bring. For example, I think they mentioned one of the last things were racism, so the fact that these refugees wouldn't be accepted. Again, not that big of a problem because right now the younger generations are much more accepting of refugees, so I think that's irrelevant. Anyway, sorry. We believe that guaranteeing these human rights is really the main important thing right now. You really can't say that we mustn't save, we don't have to save these refugees to keep our privileges, essentially. As developed nations, we have the duty to help those in need, because, as we said, we are the reason these people are in need. I'm not aware of the fact, I'm not sure if you're aware of the fact that right now, for example, countries in Africa would be much, much richer if European colonizers wouldn't have exploited them and brought them to slavery and poverty, for example. The problem wouldn't be as big as it is right now for these refugees if it wasn't our fault. And because of this, we believe that we must pay for what we did in the past and help them again. Also, as human beings, we have to help others, not just because we have the means, and I mean, that's the main reason we have the means and we have the right to do so, but just as simple human beings. I think the main emotion that we should see when seeing these people in need would be helping them and making sure that these are safe. We can just look at people dying at sea, people dying at our country borders and decide, oh yeah, I would just want to keep my privilege and I want to let them keep my borders.
You know, like,
yeah.
so
Yes.
you believe that basically hosting them is the only way helping them?
I mean, it isn't the only way, but you didn't really give us another solution. You just said that we shouldn't accept them or that you can't compromise. And since underdeveloped nations don't have the means to help themselves, this is why they are refugees, they are trying to escape their countries. If you don't help them, and if you don't want to compromise with them, you're basically saying that you want them to die. Another example I want to bring you is that, for example, in Africa, indigenous people, which are the poorest in the world, are right now have lost 98.9% of land. This is data brought by the COP, so Conference of Parties in the ONU. These people have lost almost all of the land they live on, and without their land they can't live, they can't have the means to rely on themselves, to feed themselves, to have money, to have their families too. And so they emigrate, they go to other countries to search for a better life. Now, I want to ask you, judges and fellow debaters, if you think that if you would have to leave your country behind in complete poverty, without even knowing if you would make it alive in another country, if you had to leave your family, your job, your whole life behind because you are in dire need of help, you just can't keep living where you are anymore. You would take this decision lightly. You would think, oh yeah, I'm just going to another country because they live better in that. You are traveling to another country, you're a refugee because you don't have any other option. And because of this, we have to accept them because they have nothing to go back to. If we don't accept them, they will just keep living in misery. If we accept them, we are giving them a possibility to a better life. Another thing we want to say that what you say, so just don't accept them and hope for the best, just doesn't work. And also another thing you said is that, for example, China is a developed country, you say this. China, we don't think that's the developed one, especially because, as we said in our definitions, they have a lot of social clashes, a lot of social problems in themselves. And so we don't think that it could be counted as developed because yes, they have the highest economics, they have the highest industry, but most of that is exploitations of even underage people. Also, yes?
Do you know that China is actually considered as highly developed according to the Highly Developed Human Index to the UN?
On one side, yes. On the other, though, we gave you our definitions at the beginning, and we say that we think that developed nations should have a strong social structure, which China doesn't have, and also. In the United Nations COP, they describe themselves as underdeveloped. They said it, so we aren't just imagining it. Also, you said that crime isn't frequent in China despite the highest population in the world, and that's also wrong because, for example, China has one of the highest rape counts in the world. Just something I wanted to underline. One more thing I wanted to say is that
POI. Can I ask you the source for that?
there are countless studies on the internet, you can just search it. And by the way, I thought it was common knowledge, so I didn't really, thank you. Yes, in the end I want to conclude my speech by underline again and again and again that as developed countries and as human beings have the right to accept these migrants, to help them in order to give them a better life. Since the climate change is something that is imminent, that is happening right now, and that you just can't avoid, just like wars or famine, it's something that you have to live with unless you want to put a change in it. You didn't say that you want to bring another solution to it other than not accepting these refugees. So really, the only thing that we can do is accepting them and helping them live their best lives in our countries, which is more and more possible right now because of increasing infrastructure and social structure in developed nations, and the fact that there are already many plans in action in these developed nations to help these migrants. With this, I finish my speech. Thank you.
Okay, now we can go to the third opposition team speaking. Yeah, please.
So my speech will start in 3, 2, 1. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, Madam the jury. I am Jacopo Giannini. I am the first speaker of the opposition team, and today we are debating the motion of developed countries have a moral obligation to accept more climate refugees. So obviously we are against this motion, and I will now show you why we showed that it is something that is impossible to accept, and it's something that that developed countries can't do. So I will now start by highlighting the main flaws that the proposition team speech had. So just before starting, China is a developed country by definition because the UN Index of Developing Countries defines that as developed. So I don't know what to say. It's just something that is it's a fact. So you can just say that it's not. And we actually had all the solution. We said that we think that, okay, other than just having people coming in another country and basically creating a whole other problem, we should just help them locally. We should have tailored solution tailored on certain countries. So if a country has a certain problem, we have to meet a certain problem. If another country has another problem, we have to with that. So the basic,
Sorry, don't think that this would take too much time, and also think you should have explained it a bit better, because I think it's a bit too dispersive. Thank you.
Well, I just think that it's all that what I say. We need tailored solution. You just said that we need to accept people and have them come in a country that they don't even know, and you think that there's just not going to be no consequences of that, so you didn't even bring up any other points rather than we should not just accept them because they're a full solution. So, going on. The definition of the proposition team gave us that moral duty means the current bioethical philosophy, but people can have different philosophies, so that's the whole thing that they decided that there is something is right, but you can just decide what something is ethical and unethical. And they basically said that they basically based the whole debate on the fact that they think that such countries in 200 years ago invented like factories, they should now pay the consequences. But I want to tell you one thing, they didn't even know that it was harmful to the environment. They didn't even know what the environment was. So they did something, yes, they know it is wrong, they know, yeah.
Don't you feel that they did know that exploitation at the time was also harmful for these nations?
In the 19th century, they didn't know that. They knew something, but not at that extreme level. Yes, obviously, science has evolved throughout the years, and now we know the consequences of these huge damages that they did. Only in the late 70s. Until 15 years ago, we put lead in fuel, and we didn't know it was killing everyone. And they removed it only when they knew it. So they just started discovering these things when they started studying the Antarctic, and the ice started showing carbon dioxide in the ice. That's how you measure carbon dioxide in the environment. You take ice from the Antarctic and you just analyze how much carbon dioxide is in the ice. And that's how you do it. So it's something that you can only prove years later, only when they had equipment to do that, and only when they had the knowledge to even do that. So it's something that they didn't knew. So going on, basically the proposition team is stating that if my great-grandfather killed someone 200 years ago by accident, I should still be in prison and pay the consequences for it. I think that it's totally unthinkable such thing, and also in countries with huge historic responsibility are the leaders in the help of countries with problems with environmental problems, and they have the more green politics and the more legislation helping environment. So they are already doing a great job at helping the environment and the planet rather than those underdeveloped countries. So basically, what they're saying is that in 200 years, Nigeria is going to host us all because now they're just rubbishing all the water in the earth. So they're going to host us all in 200 years because it's their fault and they should just do it. Once again, they are totally ignoring the fact of social disruption because, as we showed so many times, just people coming in another country is not something that we can do. It's something that poses a lot of threats, a lot of social disruption, as we said, a lot of loss of works, housing problems. I have many examples of that. Basically, in Germany, there was a huge housing crisis many years ago due to people immigrating in we can bring the example of ethnic neighborhoods. You can see them even here in Italy. You can see them in New York, where it is little Chinatown. There are still ethnic neighborhoods that have not really integrated into the main country. And in the 80s, Cuban refugees in Miami brought the wages of low-skilled native workers by 13%. And the third speaker said that wages are already lowering, so it's the same if we bring more people in, if we bring refugees in. So basically saying that even if we bring more people in, it's not something, nothing is going to change, but it is going to change. And this data shows that. This is because low-skilled workers suffer from new people with low skills because they have more competitiveness. They have other people that can be employed in their place. For example, another example I have, female homicides in Italy. The rate of foreign killers is actually the double than Italian killers, and these foreigners are the 8% of the population, and 16% of the femicides in Italy are caused by foreigners. This shows how, yes, it's not something racist, but it's just what this shows. They have different social experiences. They have different ethical experiences. They are just we call it cultural relativism. Basically, everyone has different experiences, different cultural experiences. So it's basically something, everyone is different, and you don't know how certain groups will react with others just because they are different. Yes, obviously, they may integrate and they may live together, but they also may not. We don't know that. And so basically, that's what the proposition team said. Just because 200 years ago the second industrial revolution happened, the countries now should still focus, should still face the consequences of it without even knowing what happened. And answering to the second, asking something to the second speaker, they brought up a whole lot of example about borders. So they said, what if someone from a place goes to another place and they stay in that border and they cannot cross? I want to ask you to name one country under the countries that face environmental problems with bordering with highly developed border, with a highly developed country. They don't exist. So basically, you just brought up an example that it is impossible to happen in real life. And the last question to the proposition team: how do you define climate refugee? So if the Geneva Convention didn't even recognize it, who recognized? How do you define a climate refugee? How does a climate refugee apply to ask for asylum? Thank you.
Okay, the first phase of this debate has just ended, so we can start with the reply phase. So starting from the opposition team with Freddy Sakura. Sorry, yes.
Start in 3, 2, 1. First of all, I would like to thank you all for this debate and for your speeches. It's been a wonderful discussion. And now to end this discussion for our team, I would like to point out the main points of pleasure that I found during our discussion and that we did not really find a solution on, and I would like to show you why our view on these topics is the correct one. Now, the first point of pleasure that I found is the possibility. What does this mean? The possibility of a developed country to accept more climate refugees. So we agree on the fact that developed countries have a stronger economy, have a stronger infrastructure, and a stronger social net. That is correct, and we are agreeing on that definition. However, this does not mean that they can accept climate refugees as much as they want, because first they have their challenge already, and we said that, we stated that multiple times, and their resources are not finite, their resources are indeed finite, are limited, so they will not manage to accept all the climate refugees that they want, and this just ends the speech here on this fact, because they, yes, have the possibility, and more possibility maybe for their own citizens, but their own citizens aren't all set, they are not all ours, they are not all rich. So just saying that developed countries can accept, and they do have to accept climate refugees because they are richer does not mean anything. Because yes, the country may be richer, but not all the citizens are richer, not all the citizens have access to all sanitation, and the USA is a clear example of that. And as we stated multiple times, simply this does not mean that they should accept more climate refugees, because they are just doing a lot of things. They are putting funds, they are implementing new regulations regarding the environment, and as we stated before, they are just doing a lot, and accepting more climate refugees is not the answer. Then the second point of question that I found is the historical responsibility. This was a main point of the proposition speech, the historical responsibility of developed nations to accept more climate refugees. On this, we answered a lot of times that nations do not have to answer to historical responsibility of 200 years ago or 100 years ago. Yes, as you said, many exploitation have been the wrong answer and has been against human rights then, but they did not know what it would cost right now and what it would cost environmentally right now. Now we have the knowledge of that, and we can act against that, so we can put funds, we can help those countries, and we can help them find solutions on their own, as we stated in my speech and in the other speeches. But this does not mean that according to something that they did 100 years ago, they now have to accept climate refugees. So they have to take all the burden of a numerous, incredible number of climate refugees in their country, and just think that they will integrate well and they will not cause any damage to the economy or minor damages to the economy and to the social net. And lastly, I would like to argue about the solutions, because we stated that the solution is prevention. So we are now, we have talked about tailored solution to local areas to help those countries. As developed countries, we can help the country, but that does not mean to accept more climate refugees. That means to put funds, again, to help them with programs, to help them with regulation, with experts, with knowledge, but that does not mean to accept more climate refugees. The only answer that the opposition team gave us is to accept, just because they are at the border, just because they are facing a terrible fate. Of course, we are not blaming the citizens, and climate refugees are in fact facing an horrible fate, but that does not mean that just accepting them is the right solution. We think that investing money in long-term solution, in long-term recovery, in developing countries is the answer. And yes, it is an imminent problem, and we need imminent answer, but if we not start by investing right now in long-term solution in those countries, we will simply not have developing countries anymore, because all their citizens will be in developing countries. Thank you for hearing my speech.
Okay, so now the last speech, the proposition team will reply.
I'll start my speech in 3, 2, 1. This debate has come to an end. I'm mainly here to make a whole reflection of what has been said, and of course try to prove to you why, in a kind of objective point of view, we have won this debate. I think this debate verted on the question whether developed countries have a moral obligation to accept more climate refugees. And we've seen two different solutions to that, and many points of clash have emerged from our debate that I thank you very much for. I'm going to now name them. The first one is urgency, I think. The second one, responsibility, disruption, and yeah, that's them. And then I'm going to show you why we have two different views of the world, we have two different wars in mind, and why our solution might be the more beneficial one to everybody. So, starting from the first point of clash, urgency. On one hand, the opposition team has shown you how we have to set some priorities, because we have to take care of other issues as well as the one that regards climate refugees. And that's why they have also as the urgency to make tailored solutions. We have tried to prove to you how this is actually time managingly not affordable, because help needs to be given now. And also that tailored solutions and acceptance in the territory. The one does not shade the other. Both can happen. So on one hand, we have the opposition team that has stated to take care of other issues as well because there are more urgent issues. On the other hand, we have tried to prove to you how climate refugees have an urgency and they need to be taken care of as much as any other issue. We can't just make a list of priorities. But when there's a human life that is at risk, we need to act on behalf of it. And that's exactly why they emigrate. The second one, responsibility, of course, that's one that was really discussed. On one hand, the opposition team has stated that the developed countries didn't know at the beginning that they were actually harming, and also that too much time has passed, so the responsibility has expired. We have tried to prove to you, on the other hand, that even though they didn't know, which we think it is, but of course it's up to interpretation, even if they didn't know the damage, we have tried to prove to you how this responsibility actually works on two main points. The damage, that was the one that was analyzed by the opposition as well. So of course, they damaged underdeveloped populations, but also the fact that through this damaging, they had some wealth. And the wealth is not something that has expired. Those developed countries still have the wealth that they made out of the damaging of those other people. So that's where the responsibility lies, and that's what we've tried to prove to you with our speeches. And that's exactly why there's a moral responsibility, because people have suffered in order for them to be wealthy and for them to be developed. The third point of clash, I think, is disruption. On one hand, the opposition team said that even developed countries go through disruption. That is true, of course, but we've tried to prove to you on another point of view that they do go through disruption. They might go through disruption if it's not integrated well, but that underdeveloped countries, of course, would go through disruption even more. We try to give to you the metaphor to make the understanding of when there's a big infrastructure, when there's a big structure and fundament, the building is less likely to crumble. So of course, the moral responsibility, that's what we're discussing on, lies on those people that do have the capability of accepting more. So yes, and also, we've tried to prove to you how if this was levied on underdeveloped countries, it would lead to wars and violence, and also it would really exacerbate the human dignity of the climate refugees themselves. And again, that's where the responsibility lies. So to conclude my speech, I want to show you the two worlds that we have given to you today. The world of the opposition team is a world with tailored solutions that we have tried to prove to you how that has time and logistics problematics, because if they immigrate, that means that there's an imperative that needs to be taken care of immediately. And on the other hand, there's our world that we hope is the most beneficial one, so the preferred one, where the tailored solutions are not excluded, but also we take in consideration the urgency of these people. And that's why we need to accept those people in order to save them. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, congratulations.